Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on those notifications. And once you're done, leave a comment down below and I just might end up responding. Drew McIntyre just became one of the two brand new first-time world champions in WWE. As Braun can now reign over Friday nights as the Universal Champion, our favorite Scottish psychopath Drew McIntyre gets to enjoy his first taste at world title gold with the WWE Championship wrapped around his waist. The match with Brock was far from exceptional, especially coming after the what the f of a Cena Fiend match? Regardless, the Chosen One has finally come to collect over a decade later, and we couldn't be happier. I'm D-Wicked from Watch WWE, and here's 10 things you might not have known about Drew McIntyre. Number 10, he's a former Intercontinental Champion. WWE hasn't done too much in the form of showing off McIntyre's first run with the company, so I'll go ahead and do it for you. The former Chosen One had quite an intriguing gimmick when he got called up to the main roster all the way back in 2009. The basic idea was that Vince McMahon handpicked Drew to be the prophesized baby Jesus of WWE. Maybe not to that extent, but he was certain McIntyre would go on to do great things in the company. After being thrown into and impressing at Survivor Series, McIntyre was put into a feud with John Morrison, another name who made his way back to the company recently. Drew would win with the poke to the eye and hold the belt for a few months before losing it to Kofi Kingston via vengeful Matt Hardy.
It's like you're going to be escorted from the arena. Read the fine print on your ticket. Kofi Kingston did it!
Definitely one of the most forgettable IC champions in history.
But you'll never take my Intercontinental title!
Number 9, he's a former TNA World Champion. If you weren't paying attention to the man's career post-WWE, you might not realize he was holding the top gold in WWE's least favorite company, good old Impact Wrestling. In 2016, Drew Galloway, as he was known everywhere else and is his actual name, would cash in TNA's version of Money in the Bank on, ironically, Matt Hardy to win the TNA World Heavyweight Championship, becoming the first Scottish-born to do so. Galloway would drop the belt to Lashley, no Bobby, just 3 months later and lose every match where he tried getting the title back. Drew would go on to also win the Impact Grand Championship, which I'll be very transparent about, I don't understand in the slightest. I think it's a 3-round every match championship. That's weird. It's defunct now, so I don't care.
Drew Galloway to cash in his World Championship briefcase and become World Champion!
Number 8, he's got his degree, and not just any old degree. Drew McIntyre's got a master's in criminology. Earned at the Glasgow Caledonian University, Drew knew from a young age that he was extremely into crime. In fact, crime and pro wrestling were a young McIntyre's 2 favorite joys in the whole wide world. Drew would begin training to become a pro wrestler at the age of just 15, but had to negotiate with his parents over their support. Well, not really. Mr. and Mrs. Galloway were very open and helpful when it came to getting Drew out there, going as far as to drive him up to 12 hours whenever necessary just to get their kid to a match. But in order to maintain such a high level of support, Drew had to maintain a high GPA. And he did, always putting maximum effort into both his training and his schooling, eventually going on to earn himself that master's.
I was a boy during my first run. I was 21 when I got signed. I never had a chance to grow up, straight from university, my parents' house, to straight to WWE and been told what to do.
Number 7, he was in 3MB. Alright, here's a softball entry for anyone who has watched over the last 5 years, but we try keeping these lists friendly to new WWE viewers as well. So, for anyone just tuning in the first time and seeing this badass Drew McIntyre hoisting up the top company belt, congratulations, you're currently seeing Drew McIntyre at his peak. Let's talk about him at the Valley. I mentioned his Chosen One gimmick earlier, which came about in 2009, but by 2011, it was pretty clear that McIntyre either wasn't ready for the position in the company, or the company was just tired of trying to position him as such. After a good few months not really doing anything of note, McIntyre was lumped together with fellow jobbers Jinder Mahal and Heath Slater and named the 3-man band. 3MB, a play on Heath's former gimmick as the 1-man band. This right here is the lowest you can get when it comes to the roster.
Guys, we're live, big man. We can't stop. You gotta go.
Number 6, he's been married twice. Drew McIntyre is a hot property in the WWE, but according to the ladies, he's that in more ways than one. Back in 2010, Drew would marry his first wife, Taryn Terrell, a former professional wrestler who went by the name Tiffany in both WWE and TNA. The marriage would be short-lived, however, as just a year later, the two split and got a divorce. In 2015, Drew would begin dating a woman named Caitlyn, with a last name I'm not going to bother trying. Caitlyn doesn't really have any role in pro wrestling besides obviously supporting her husband, instead being a doctor, and would go on to marry McIntyre after a year of dating, with the two still together to this day. Number 5, he chose NXT. When McIntyre made his way back into the company in 2017, he was exactly what Vince McMahon was looking for. Contrary to his last few years as a complete jobber, Vince and Drew actually ended on pretty good terms, with Vince basically just saying, Drew, get out there and find yourself, dude. He definitely found himself, and that new Drew was far better built and full of face and chest hair, two things that genuinely 180'd McIntyre on just an appearance basis. Throw in how much better he became inside of the ring and behind a microphone, and you get a man ready to be made. Drew, as well as Triple H, thought it would be a better idea to come back down to Full Sail and refamiliarize himself with the company before jumping back to the main roster, and so that's the choice that he made. And, as such, number 4, he's the only re-signed star to win the NXT Championship. Drew holds an interesting little distinction from any other wrestler ever, being the only man to leave WWE, be re-signed, and then go down to win the big gold and black strap. Only a few wrestlers have done anything even sort of similar. I mean, Kevin Owens wrestled in War Games after being called up to the main roster. Finn Balor full-on returns to NXT after a stint on Monday Night Raw and nearly won the NXT title. And Johnny Gargano actually did win the NXT Championship after a short-lived, very odd period of time on the main roster. But obviously none of those three were fired from the company before going back down to NXT. It's an odd tidbit of info, but a record that only McIntyre currently holds.
It was at NXT TakeOver Brooklyn 3 in August that Drew McIntyre dethroned Bobby Roode.
Number 3, his interactions with the FBI at age 10. This is a strange one. At 10 years old, Drew Galloway was having a little back and forth convo with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The young Andrew was incredibly fascinated with the conspiratorial. Again, he was very into crimes, but also reading into a bunch of magazines relating to that subject matter during his youth. One of these magazines, X Factor, specialized in conspiracy theories and ghost stories. Drew was so intrigued that he actually wrote to the FBI under the Freedom of Information Act, and lo and behold, the FBI actually responded to a 10-year-old. Not only did they respond, but they actually sent Drew a file with several documents containing whatever subjects he had asked about. Believe it or not, Mr. Galloway was a little bit concerned over the fact that his son was receiving documentations from the FBI. Number 2, his long-standing feud with Sheamus. In the WWE, Drew McIntyre and Sheamus never really had much of a feud. I think they wrestled twice in total between 2011 and 2012 on random shows. But when it came to their pre-WWE careers, the two actually had one of the great Euro independent feuds of the mid-2000s, wrestling multiple times for Irish Whip Wrestling's top championship. Their feud became quite patriotic, with Drew's Scottish blues contrasting Sheamus' Irish greens, and as it became more patriotic, it also became more destructive. The two initially wrestled just a singles match, then a 2 out of 3 falls match, a last man standing match, and finally concluded their feud with an epic I Quit match, one 100% worth going and finding online.
Up goes Galloway, here comes the Celtic Slam, there it is! The Celtic Slam by SOS, the leg is hooked, and that's it! He cheated.
And number 1, the Claymore was an accident. Drew McIntyre currently has one of the best finishers in all of WWE, hell, all of pro wrestling, the Claymore. The diving head kick far surpasses his former Shockwave DDT finisher, genuinely being one of the biggest pops of the night every single time it gets hit. The best part is that Drew never actually intended for the move to be a thing. Before the Claymore, Drew was testing out different variations on the slam to find his finisher, but during a random match, Drew tried to go for the big boot, but due to his pants being too tight, he couldn't extend and ended up falling through on the kick. But later, Drew went back and watched the match, realized it looked pretty cool, and has kept it as his actual finisher to this day. That might be the greatest finisher origin story out there.
ran to Big Boot Ryback, and I lifted my leg because the pants are so tight. I kicked up my other foot and I knocked myself loopy. So I gave him like the Claymore.
And those are 10 things you might not have known about Drew McIntyre. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments down below. After liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and notifications, ring that bell.